to Canberra to discuss all the big headlines today. Political editor of the Australian newspaper, Dennis Shanahan, joins me. Dennis, your old boss, Chris Mitchell, I think wrote a very, very strong comment piece in the Australian today. I talked about it at the top of the show, but I then interviewed Matt Canavan. He's making it very clear that he is not going to support this 2050 net zero push. It looks like Michael McCormack has got it on the table if they could pull out agriculture, which is exactly what they're doing in New Zealand. The PM keeps saying, but it's all got to have a plan. We've got to know how much it's going to cost. How much is this about tensions inside the coalition, or perhaps an early strike on McCormack's leadership, do you think?
Well, I think it's probably a bit of both there, Peter. I think that the Nationals, for quite some time now, you remember last year, there was essentially Michael McCormack was put on notice. He had to toughen up, had to differentiate the Nationals from the Liberals. And this whole issue of net zero emissions by 2050 could very well be the one that triggers the real pressure on McCormack and the tensions within the coalition. So I think that the pressure will be on, and that Scott Morrison is going to have to manage this, but the real risk is for Michael McCormack.
We've seen today Anthony Albanese really kick off a Queensland push, and he's told in campaign preparations his shadow cabinet to get working on policy commitments, being quite tough in his language about the budget. It always makes me sort of have a bit of a wry smile when Labor talks about spending cuts and caring about taxpayer dollars. But this is all part of getting themselves ready if and when the PM was to call an election this year. Queensland's critical. I mean, a 26% primary vote at the last election. He's got to make up a lot of ground up in Cairns today. There's a real push, isn't there, for some post-JobKeeper support for the tourism industry. What do you think his reception's been like in the Sunshine State?
Oh, look, I think people have been quite welcoming to Anthony Albanese. He's got a real problem, of course. The regions in Queensland really turned against Labor at the last election. He's got to try and convince them that the Labor net zero emissions by 2050 isn't going to hurt the miners and the regions in Queensland. This curious thing where he's appointed a Queensland resources spokesman. I mean, no other state has a resources spokesman of their own, so there's real pressure on Anthony Albanese there. And telling his shadow ministers to get ready for an election if it's there is fair enough, but it also demonstrates that Labor went to the last election with too many taxes and an uncosted climate change policy. Is the costing going to involve a costing for 2050 net zero emissions and for any medium 2030 target if they decide to adopt one? Anthony Albanese is he's fighting fit in Queensland, but there's a lot of challenges he's facing there.
It would be a mistake, wouldn't it, Dennis, to see the Palaszczuk win last year as a vote of confidence in Labor per se, particularly when Anthony Albanese is up against an opponent like the PM. I mean, they're both from New South Wales, but Scott Morrison can talk Queensland in a way that we haven't seen Albo do yet.
Well, that's right. And look, there were some absurd federal Labor claims after Anastasia Palaszczuk's state victory. It went against the trend. It was all about COVID response and border closures. She actually won there, and she'd also changed some of her stance on Adani, which was such an issue during the federal election. So I think that parallels between state Labor victory and a potential federal Labor gain are pretty thin. And I think that Anthony Albanese is having real trouble talking Queensland. As Scott Morrison told his colleagues, he wants to be able to say the same thing in regional Queensland as he says in suburban Melbourne. Now, I don't think Anthony Albanese is going to be able to say that within the Labor Party, and that's why he's got a special Queensland shadow minister.
Yeah, we'll see if it works a treat or not. We'll know soon enough. Dennis Shanahan, political editor at The Australian, thank you for your company.
Thank you, Peter.